He was not suffering from mental illness.
Now, one of the things that I just want to I want to reiterate this, because this is so critical. This is so critical. And when I was researching policing in Brazil, there are a lot of similarities between the policing of communities of color in Brazil, in South Africa, and the United States. There's a lot of similarities. And one of the articles that I read, it was a black person who was incarcerated. I don't want to say a criminal who was incarcerated, because he is imprisoned, but that does not necessarily mean he's a criminal. But they asked him, help us understand your perspective. He said, in Brazil, a justice system works where you are arrested, you go to court, you are found guilty, and then you become a criminal because you have been found guilty. Whereas in the United States, or in his case, Brazil, he said, I am first criminalized. There is no question about whether I'm innocent or guilty. I am first criminalized before I've done anything. I'm automatically assumed to be a criminal, and my body is criminalized. And so me sitting in this prison cell is just a result of me already having been criminalized from the day I was born.
Right.
And so what he was talking about is how the Brazilian system and the police system is, he is not surprised. He doesn't feel surprised. He just feels like this is his fate. Going to prison is just part of his fate, or being killed by the police is part of his fate. Now, one of the things he also reflected on, which I'd love to talk to you about, is police training. Police training, specifically around, one of the things he spoke about in his arrest was the way in which the minute he was confronted with the police, he laid down on the ground with his face to the floor and his hands out, because he had always been taught that if you are standing on your feet, they're going to break your legs, because they think that they got to just immobilize you immediately, because again, like you said, right, that same sort of mentality. Now I want to dig into, so that's the outcome, but now I want to dig into some of the training. And this came out in the Derek Chauvin trial, Dr. Alston, where they spoke about training and they used this term excessive force. That was a term, a phrase that was used consistently. We're going to hear this more and more. We saw this with Trayvon Martin. We saw this with the chokehold. When the phrase "I can't breathe" is connected to this phrase excessive force. Okay, help us understand this term excessive force. Help us understand, the training that leads to this. Help us understand and conceptualize, because in the same trial we had somebody get up there and say this was justifiable force. This is not excessive. This is completely justifiable. It was a threat. So this idea, this contention around excessive force is something that we need to understand in these situations. Help us unpack that.
So what the term excessive force is trying to do is trying to get the lay person to understand that they're trying to get them to think that there's a measure of force, right? That we can measure force. And when we say it's excessive, it speaks to the point that it was beyond what was necessary. But inside policing, we teach officers to use the force necessary to stop the threat. We never say excessive force. We never say we're gonna shoot somebody to stop them. No, we're gonna use the appropriate level of force to stop the threat. So there's a dissonance between the two, right? There's a dissonance. You're talking about excessive force. We're talking about using the amount of force necessary to stop the threat. What threat? The threat that I perceive as an individual. Well, is there a measure for that perceived amount of threat? No, there isn't. It's up to my judgment to use the amount of force necessary to stop the threat. So there's a huge dissonance between that. So when you say excessive force, it's an attempt to help lay people understand. It's a lay term laid upon a more complex issue that's happening inside of policing. So we teach police officers to use the amount of force necessary, and only the amount of force necessary, to stop the threat. But we don't define what the threat is. We no longer match
the threat, right?
So then you're absolutely right. Being black is threat enough. So we're teaching people to eliminate the threat. And in a lot of police officers' mind, your black body is the threat. And oh, by the way, that black body is impervious to tasing and pain and is big and it can hurt me. And oh, by the way, you also teach police officers, you got to go home. Do whatever it takes to go home first. Do whatever it takes to go home because you got a family and everything too. What we forget to tell them is make sure that other person goes home too because he wants to go home. She wants to go home too. So, but I think the last 20 years, so let me tell you about the last 20 years of police training in America. There has been this emergence of third-party training providers that are outside of the normal police training. And there's a couple of companies that come to mind. When I was at the police academy at Dallas, I would make it a point not to allow these people to come to our academy. We didn't sponsor any of their training. Well, what they do is they teach hypervigilism. They teach officers to be hypervigilant, that you have to get your shot off first because you're going to go home. And if you follow our example, not only we're gonna use all of this fake science and $50 words, and we're gonna confuse people, and we're gonna get all these use of force experts that we've created science around that is not peer reviewed, and we're gonna confuse everybody in the jury, and we're gonna let people know that they don't know what they're talking about, and that we trained you to a standard, and this is what happened, blah, blah, blah. The whole idea really, and all the videos, right? And there's a reason that we could never record their training. They would never let anybody come from the outside, and none, because in almost every one of their videos was a black person or a person of color as an example to be hypervigilant against. Mm-hmm. When Philando Castile was killed by that college campus police officer who shouldn't have even been on the street doing traffic stops, right? They made sure they didn't expose his training record. Because if you saw his training record, you would have saw that hypervigilance training on his training record. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That taught him that you need to shoot and kill first. Mm. So there are a lot of police departments out there who can't afford to provide training for their officers. So where are these officers going to get training to keep their licenses? They're gonna get their training from these third-party companies that charge $20 a seat. Well, if I sponsor the training, I get my seat for free, and then all my buddies can come and they pay $20 and we get the same training. The training is not regulated, it is not sanctioned, it's not proved, it's not accredited by anybody. But they're teaching police officers to be hypervigilant, and they're using black bodies, black examples, people of color on these traffic stops or on these situations, or people who are hyped up on PCP, black. People who are hyped up on angel dust or any other chemical, Hispanic, or they're people acting up, shooting at police on a traffic stop, black. Every time you pull a black person over, so it sends this subliminal message, right? That person, I got to get the jump on them. And that's how you get Philando Castile killed in his car by a police officer who was hyped up on, who wasn't supposed to be pulling people over anyway out of his jurisdiction. And he was hyped up on vigilante training. And oh, by the way, it's not just execute the training. We're gonna add another caveat. If you ever get in trouble, we'll come defend you.
We'll protect you. So
we'll protect you.
I'm curious. I'm curious on. So one of the things that really I think is a critical question, right? And I want to explore both of these, right? I'm going to ask you to talk about shifting the system from the inside, and I'm going to ask you from shifting the system from the outside. Okay, so I'm going to kind of ask you those two pieces. Let's talk about the inside first. I mean, you did incredible research in Ferguson, Missouri. You were really looking into this idea of how to respond to Black Lives Matter's protests. Let's be honest. I mean, for people who are advocating for honestly, for police to be accountable to their communities, they were, I mean, regardless of whether someone says they were looting or whatever, looting is a very subjective term, because when Black folks protest, all of a sudden the words looting always seem to emerge in the ecosystem, whether that's actually occurring or not. So
right.
I always want to be critical of the language that's produced around
and the word riot
about Black pain, right, and how it's expressed.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Mm-hmm. But I just wanna peel back into your research there for a little bit. I mean, you mentioned that you produced a report, and so I'm talking from the inside, right? So this report, there's another piece that I want to add to this that I'd like you to reflect on. Another piece that we often hear about in the wake of all of this is, well, we want to recruit more diverse police officers. I mean, I lived in New York City. That was a huge recruitment drive. The city of Chicago, Boston, huge recruitment for Black and brown police officers, and obviously multiple sexualities, et cetera, et cetera. And the idea is that if we get these folks more representative, we will have a different police force. I am skeptical of this. I'm going to lead into the question by saying I am skeptical by putting more police officers of color in a system that's designed in the way that you've described. So I don't know. I want to pull those two pieces together. You've looked at the policies. You've designed some policies. You felt like they didn't go anywhere. The other policy is diverse recruitment. What do you think about those two things, and what do you think about change from the inside? What does that look like for you?
So I'm gonna digress for 1 second. So they always talk about, we need to hire more minorities, hire more women. Inside police organizations, they're screaming that we're lowering the standards, which is a dog whistle. Absolutely. Right? You talk about coded language, right?
Absolutely.
They're lowering the standards for these minorities. When in actuality, when you look at the data, minorities actually bring up the educational standards of policing in America. So I want to talk about that whole, we got to get more minorities in. There's a scream for more minorities to come in. But inside the system is arguing we're lowering the standards for minorities. And it prevents.
Pause there for a moment. Okay, so for those who are not understanding this word minorities, in the US, minorities is a word that can be used for different racial groups. Sorry, I just want to make sure.
So when you're talking about women, Blacks, people of color, Hispanics, anybody. So the idea is, they're lowering the standard, which is dog whistle, to stop recruiting those individuals. So anyway, so I think the research is pretty sound on the fact that agencies across the country that have more women have less use of force complaints. Because women, for a lot of different reasons, they have to be better negotiators, and they are better negotiators. And there's a lot less use of force. When you add more diversity to a police department over time, it does deliver better police services to the communities they serve. The only problem is it just takes time, right? Hiring one Black police officer amongst 30 white police officers is not really going to have a whole lot of change, because you have to change the system as well, right? You have to change the system as well. That one person is going to face a whole lot of resistance to do anything, even just be around, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to kind of wholesale look at, not only do we have to change policies, recruiting, and who we bring on as police officers, but we have to also measure that progress and what it's actually doing as a result of that somebody coming in. So if I was a purely white police department today, chief of police, and I started bringing in women and minorities, I have to start now measuring, is there a reduction in use of force complaints? Is there more acceptance into the community? Can we measure our level of trust and legitimacy? Is all of that going up over time? Because it takes time, right? It takes time. And then, by the way, it only takes one person to come in and do something bad, and somebody says, "See, I told you, they're not fit for the job."
Yeah.
They are not fit for the job. Well, who's they? Well, you know who they are, right? So that becomes huge. And so and they have this constant fight with police unions, who they don't want women and minorities or women and Blacks and people of color to fill their ranks, because they're not the ones that they're protecting. They're protecting the person who's always been a police officer, the white officer. They don't speak for brown and Black and colored and women police officers. They don't. They speak for the vast majority of police officers who are white males in this country who feel under siege and have to be protected.
So so shifting. So obviously people see that, right? So then they think, okay, well let's push from the outside in. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask you to reflect on two elements of this, Dr. Alston. I'm going to ask you to reflect at the systemic level when people talk about defunding the police, okay? And if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to talk about the individual level, right, for a second. A lot of people have come forward and said, well, why didn't anyone just tackle Derek Chauvin? Why didn't anyone just get in there and, put their life on the line? And why do people sit here and record people getting murdered on TV? Okay.
Mhm.
Now, I don't have the answer to that, but I can imagine that for many people, there's a lot happening. And I'm not saying whether they should or whether they shouldn't. I'm just really interested to hear your perspective on people saying from the outside, let's defund the police. Let's, this political movement at the moment to defund the police
Mhm.
as an intervention at a systemic level. But then folks are talking about intervening in police
Mhm.
violence. How
Mhm.
would you recommend people, and I'm not taking your professional opinion as the gospel, I'm just saying some general
Right.
principles that citizens can take when they witness a George Floyd moment, as a former police officer, kind of give us a sense of some things other than just recording a man getting murdered, right? Obviously, recording is important. Documentation is critical. But could there be more things that folks could have done? Are there things that we as ordinary citizens can do in moments such as that? So I'm going to ask you to reflect on both, if you wouldn't mind. And I have to say,
So,
as a kind of disclosure, I'm not asking for advice to intervene in a legal arrest. I'm just asking for general principles that we can save someone's life if such a
right.
thing happens. Okay, I just want to make that clear.
So outside looking in, you would think to yourself, why are these police officers standing around while this other officer is literally murdering a human being? Why? That's shocking to them. Why?
Exactly.
But you have to understand the dynamics inside of a police organization, right? Let's say, for example, one of the officers did push Officer Chalklen off of George Floyd and saved his life, right? Inside of the police organization, that person would have been chastised, ridiculed, and probably would have been run off. The person probably would have been disciplined, and he probably would have been fired, right? So, and that's because the organization, the police organization, is designed to protect bad behavior. They don't want their dirty laundry to be exposed to the community. They don't want people to say what, they don't want anything going on. So let's say one of those officers did stop Chauvin from killing George Floyd. That person probably wouldn't be a police officer today because the system would have gotten rid of him, because the system is designed to protect bad behavior. And if you shine a light on bad behavior, they attack the person carrying the light as opposed to attacking the problem. So that's the kind of the structural. So that's the system responding to protecting itself.
Okay.
And this case is the George Floyd case is very interesting in the fact that not only did we see this play itself out, officers doing exactly what they were expected to do, turn a blind eye to somebody using excessive force, and shine the bright light from the outside in to what's really going on inside of police departments. And what's really going on is there's always this constant thing, this constant assertive behavior to sweep bad policing under the rug. And the problem was they simply couldn't sweep this under the rug. They couldn't sweep it because people were asking a fundamental question. Why didn't somebody stop him? Right? Well, it's not as simple as that because, if I would have stopped him, I would have went back to my station. They would have disarmed me, put me on administrative leave. I would have got punished and I would have been fired. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's real. So that's the system protecting itself. It's designed that way. And it's really because, and so you ask yourself, well, why is that? Why is that? Police unions and associations in this country have outsized power and influence over discipline within police departments. They literally can tell who gets punished and who doesn't. That's how powerful they are. Wow. And if their goal is to protect bad police officers, they're going to do everything in their power to do that. So you have a chief or a manager, a police supervisor, or a police lieutenant manager or a chief who tries to discipline a bad officer, they get run out of town by the police association. Wow. Because the police association has more political clout than the leader of that organization.
So a bad police
officer. Now the leader of the organization may very well have an interest what did you say?
I'm so sorry. I'm just talking out loud. But a bad apple with a lot of political power is literally more powerful than their boss in some cases or whatever.
Absolutely. And that's all across the United States. That's happening all across the United States. So police associations have their original mission was to take care of the families of police officers that are killed in line of duty. But because over time, municipalities, local governments, county governments didn't want to pay police officers what they deserve as pay, it compensated them by giving them control over discipline, giving them control over policy, giving them control over the officers, and giving them this wide powers, political powers that they don't deserve. And they've used that to protect bad police officers time and time and time again. They don't care about protecting good police officers. Good police officers don't need protection because they're doing it right.
Exactly.
It's the bad police officers that these associations are spending millions and millions of dollars on protecting, because it goes way back to the slave patrols, right? We're going to protect you. If you do this bad job for us, we're going to protect you.
We do not have.
And that's where this whole comes from. This idea that we have to protect the worst amongst us.
Exactly.
So that's how it. So on an individual level, I can see where. I mean, I told you about the story of me pulling officers off a person that I thought they were literally trying to kill this person. I got pretty much verbally reprimanded for that. But I stood up to it and said, whatever. Well, you're not going to get promoted to lieutenant now. Okay, whatever. I mean, I would have done the same thing over again. But a young police officer just starting out, like in the George Floyd thing, all those are young rookie police officers pretty much standing around.
Yeah.
So let's ask the real question. Where was the police supervisor? Where was the leadership in the organization when this is going down? Nowhere to be found, right? Because there's another thing going on in police organizations. If I'm not there, I can't be held accountable. As soon as I show up, let's say, for example, if I was a sergeant and I showed up at minute 4 of him pressing down on George Floyd, I own that incident now.
Yeah.
As a police supervisor, I own it because it's the expectation that I would have done something about it. I could have seen. Now, a rookie officer would be afraid to do anything about that senior officer. But if I'm a sergeant, a first-line supervisor, hell yeah, I'm supposed to do something. By my position, I have fiduciary responsibility to step in. But I can't be held accountable if I don't show up. And you look at every major police incident that has happened in the last 60 years in this country. All you have to do is look at the video or look at the tape or look at the police account. Where's the supervisor? They're not there because the organization doesn't want to be held accountable. We can say that's a bad apple, but we don't want to say the barrel is bad.
Exactly. So Dr. Alston, I've got the last question for you here, and I'm just got to tell you, I've loved every second of this. This has been just, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm curious about is, what are we not asking and what are we not doing when it comes to racism and policing in the United States? What questions are we not asking? Where are we not looking? This is like you spoke earlier about this hole has opened up and now there's a huddle happening probably right now as we speak, as this is being recorded. There's a huddle happening somewhere around how can we plug this hole, right? So we also have to be huddling. We also have to be engaging. We also have to be leaning in. What questions should we be asking? What are we not asking enough of? I think I'll just leave it there. So I guess just to simplify the question, what questions are we not asking and what are we not doing when it comes to racism and policing at the individual and systemic levels? What are your thoughts?
So I think we have to really get aggressive about asking who becomes a police officer, like in your local town or your municipality. How does a person, how do they get trained? Who supervises them? How does a person get promoted, right? Who gets to be a sergeant or a trainer or a lieutenant? And what is the disciplinary record of all of the officers? What are we doing? What early warning systems are in place to prevent a bad officer from continuing on? Because Officer Traven has a disciplinary record as long as my arm. But he was still able to be a police officer, right? Because of all the stuff we talked about before.
Yeah.
So at some point you have to say, maybe this person is not fit to be a police officer. So does your agency have a fit for duty criteria? And how are you doing it? How are you checking a person is fit for duty, right? You may have an officer that's suffering from post-traumatic stress. and simply can't do the job anymore. How are you verifying that? And then from a systemic level, it's very interesting when this last shooting where the young man drove off and the officer was playing taser. So the mayor stepped in. He got emergency powers from the city council. He fired the city manager. He allowed the chief of police to resign, and he fired the police officer. For a lot of municipalities across this country, they operate under a city council form of government, which is accountable to the people, right? So the people elect the city council, but it's the city council that appoints the city manager. And by city charter, the city manager is literally the king of his municipality, right? Where I live, for example, there's a guy who's been the city manager for 45 years. If he walked past me right now, I wouldn't even know who he was. So I would be asking, who really is in charge of our city? Because you think the mayor is in charge or the city council is in charge? I'll venture to say they're not. There's some person, male or female, who is the city manager and who by charter has unfettered authority to do whatever they want with all city departments, including the police. They pick the police chief, they pick who gets promoted, they approve budgets for training and equipment, right? So we have to, don't go to the mayor's office and protest the mayor and scream at the mayor. Find out who your city manager is and put pressure on that guy. Expose him or her. So another question is, who really runs your city?
Who really runs
your city? Why is that person not accountable to the people?
Exactly.
Because that's how you thwart police reform over and over and over again. After the July 16th shooting in Dallas, where 5 police officers were killed in one night. In the municipality where I live, the police chief bought every single officer a rifle to respond to the violence. Wow. Bought the rifles, handed to them, but no training, and said, if anybody starts shooting at you, engage them with the rifle. Right? That was their response. But it wasn't, and the city manager approved that expense. One day, officers in my town didn't have patrol rifles. The next day they had them. And the chief of police's explanation was, this is in response to what happened in Dallas. I don't want my officers to be outgunned.
Wow.
What? So now we have this tranquil, peaceful community with police officers riding around with rifles who were given to them and were not trained properly in their deployment. Now, they might have been trained since then, but when they first gave them those rifles, they were like, here, this is our response. Well, the only approval that can come from is the city manager, because he has to approve the budget to buy them.
So it seems like
we have to start asking those really tough questions about how the system really works. And then we have to find pain points for the system, right? Because the system has pain points. We have to find them and we have to really start pressing on them, right? If you don't know how your local police department works, find out. If you don't know how your local city government works, ask the questions and find out. Show up. I want to speak to my city manager, and then expose that person, whoever that person he or she is, and let everybody know this is who makes the decisions in the city. That mayor or that person doesn't, they're figureheads. This is the guy that really makes a decision. And find out how, if they're not doing a good job or they're not responsive to the community, how you drive them out of the system and replace them with somebody who is going to be responsive to the community's needs.
Awesome. Dr. Alston, I've loved this. I've loved this. This has been.
Well, I hope it adds some value and some context.
This has been a gift.
And I want to be, I just want to be perfectly clear. I was a police officer. I love being a police officer. They're out there trying to do a very tough job. But there are some bad apples amongst us, and there are bad apples because the barrel is bad. Absolutely. And we need full-scale police reform. And I believe the only way it's going to come is with federal force, federal resources, and federal dollars to get it done.
Awesome.
Because we've given them 100+ years to reform themselves, and they haven't done it on their own.
Exactly. So, Dr. Alston, I'm gonna just thank you so much for your time. I mean, this has been amazing, and you know what? I feel so thankful to you for just spending time on this very historic day. I think
very historic. Very historic.
We can't ever lose sight of the fact that this has been a long time coming. we need to just see the sentence. We need to see the sentence. It's not a 11-month sentence or 2-year sentence. We need to see some really good sentencing. But at the end of the day, I just want to really appreciate you for your time. And I really say thank you very, very much.
And I hope